The galaxy had always been a vast and merciless place, filled with empires that rose to power only to fall into ruin. Over the ages, countless species had come and gone, some with great military might, others with advanced technologies, but none had ever feared humanity. Earth was seen as a backward planet, a minor blip in the endless cosmic expanse, far behind the sophisticated empires that ruled the stars. The humans on Earth were a young species, their technologies limited, their influence barely a whisper compared to the greater powers. To many, humans were just another species among thousands, destined to be forgotten. But that perception was about to change, and it began with a single, unexpected event. Commander Zahar, a seasoned war hero from the Graxar Empire, had fought in many battles across the galaxy. His people, the Graxar, were known for their ruthless strategies, advanced weapons, and unyielding dominance in warfare. They considered themselves the pinnacle of civilization, believing that no species, least of all humans, could ever challenge their might. So when a Graxar fleet was sent to Earth to conquer and subdue its primitive population, the commanders in charge had little concern. After all, humanity had never shown any sign of being anything more than a weak, uncoordinated species, easily overrun by superior forces. However, the Graxar made a grave mistake by underestimating the humans, and it was on that day that Zahar witnessed something that would change everything he thought he knew about warfare. Captain Elias Riker, a leader of Earth's military forces, was not like the other humans Zahar had observed. He was different, sharp-minded, creative, and above all, unpredictable. While most of Earth's armies were still learning to fight against the overwhelming Graxar threat, Riker quickly proved that his mind was the most powerful weapon in this fight. Instead of meeting the Graxar head-on in a conventional battle, Riker used Earth's terrain to his advantage. He led guerrilla attacks that disrupted the enemy's supply lines, sabotaged their equipment, and most importantly, threw the Graxar into disarray with tactics they had never encountered. This was not the behavior of a defeated species. No, Riker's forces didn't just fight. They adapted, they learned, and they attacked in ways the Graxar could never predict. It was a bold gamble, one that paid off. Zahar, observing the chaos from his command ship, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. His own soldiers were struggling against an enemy they had never considered a threat. The humans weren't simply fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. They were unpredictable, a quality that made them far more dangerous than any alien force could have imagined. The Graxar had always relied on their strength, their weapons, and their numbers, but none of those advantages seemed to matter against the ingenuity and resilience of the humans. Riker's audacity in the face of such overwhelming odds sparked something in Zahar, a realization that humanity was not the insignificant species he had once thought them to be. In fact, it was becoming clear that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had ever realized. As the days passed and the Graxar forces suffered losses, Zahar began to question his previous beliefs. His respect for Riker grew, not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of humanity's spirit. He knew that something important had shifted, not just in the course of the battle, but in the balance of power in the galaxy itself. Humanity had made it clear that they would not be conquered no matter the cost. And it was this moment, this change in the tide of the war, that led Zahar to make a decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. He would tell this story. He would share the tale of how humanity, once considered weak and insignificant, had turned the tables on the most powerful empire in the galaxy. This was no longer just a war for Earth's survival. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where humans could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The galaxy would have to reckon with humanity, and Zahar's story would ensure that no one would ever make the mistake of underestimating humans again. From that moment onward, the fate of the galaxy was forever changed, and Commander Zahar knew that humanity's reputation was just beginning to rise. The day Zahar first witnessed humanity's true strength, he was both captivated and astounded. The Graxar Empire, in all its might and power, had launched a full-scale invasion of Earth with a single objective: to conquer. They arrived with their vast fleet, bringing advanced weaponry and an army that had crushed civilizations across the stars. It was supposed to be a simple operation: land, eliminate any resistance, and claim the planet as another addition to the Empire's growing dominion. The Graxar expected little more than an easy conquest, a matter of days, maybe weeks at most, before humanity was subjugated. They had underestimated Earth's defenders. Captain Elias Riker, a man who had been thrust into leadership after the planet's defense forces were stretched thin, was not about to let Earth fall without a fight. He had spent years observing the Graxar, studying their weaknesses, and most importantly, understanding the land he was sworn to protect. The terrain of Earth, its dense forests, mountains, and valleys, had long been a place of refuge for humans. But it had never been used to its full advantage in warfare, not until now. The Graxar, with their overwhelming firepower, were accustomed to direct, open battles. They didn't understand how humans could use the environment itself as a weapon on Ai. That fateful day, Zahar was positioned high above Earth in the Graxar command ship, watching with keen interest as the invasion unfolded below. He observed Riker and his forces in the wilds of North America, a place where nature had not yet been fully tamed. Riker's unit, a small group of elite soldiers, hid themselves in the shadows of towering trees, blending in with their surroundings. They moved with precision, silent and swift, striking only when the time was right. When a battalion of Graxar soldiers, confident in their overwhelming numbers, marched into the forest, they had no idea what was about to happen. The ambush came without warning. The humans had set traps, lured the Graxar into the perfect position, and then struck with such ferocity that it left the alien soldiers stunned. They were caught between a lethal combination of surprise and strategy. Explosions rang out as Riker's soldiers attacked from all sides, using the terrain to their advantage. They knew the forest's every secret, where the ground could give way, where the trees provided perfect cover, where the enemy would be most vulnerable. The Graxar were trained to fight in open combat, to destroy their enemies with sheer firepower, but here, they were outmatched by the very land they thought they controlled. Zahar watched in disbelief as his troops struggled. The Graxar, despite their superior technology, were being dismantled by a handful of humans, fighting with nothing more than their wits, their courage, and a deep-rooted determination to defend their home. The battle was over within hours, with the Graxar suffering heavy casualties. Riker, though outnumbered, had taken down an entire battalion. The Graxar's greatest strength, superior military technology, had been turned against them by nothing more than human resolve and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. From his vantage point, Zahar felt a pang of respect. He had seen many species fight, but none like this. The humans didn't fight because they had no choice. They fought because they could not imagine a world without freedom. What he saw wasn't simply survival, it was an unyielding will to win. Even when the Yai odds were stacked against them, even when defeat seemed certain, humans did not yield. They adapted, they learned, and they fought with an ingenuity that no alien force had expected. As the Graxar regrouped and tried to assess the damage, Zahar couldn't help but reflect on what had just occurred. This wasn't just an isolated victory. It was a statement. The humans were not a species to be underestimated. They had just taken on the most powerful military force in the galaxy and emerged victorious, using only their minds and their environment. It was a lesson that Zahar would never forget, a lesson that would change his view of humanity forever. He knew that this encounter would be the first of many. And though the Graxar had no intention of retreating, they now faced a new kind of enemy, one that would not simply fight to survive, but one that would fight to win at any cost. This was only the beginning. As the war against the Graxar Empire dragged on, humanity's reputation began to spread far and wide. The name Captain Elias Riker soon became synonymous with relentless defiance and unwavering courage. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival had evolved into something much greater, a revolution. Riker was no longer just a soldier, he was a symbol, the very embodiment of humanity's indomitable spirit. His tactics, though unorthodox, turned the tide of every battle. What was once thought to be a hopeless defense became a beacon of hope for all of Earth. Riker's brilliance lay not just in his military strategies, but in his ability to inspire. It wasn't just his soldiers who fought beside him. Entire cities rose up in defiance of the invaders, motivated by his courage and his words. Riker taught humanity how to fight back in ways the Graxar could never have anticipated, turning every inch of Earth into a weapon. The forests, the mountains, the cities, everything became part of their fight. Zahar, watching from the safety of the Graxar command fleet, began to feel a growing unease. He had seen many battles, fought against countless species, but never. Had he encountered anything like this? The Graxar, in all their might, had always relied on overwhelming force, on crushing their enemies with sheer power. Yet, here they were, fighting a species with none of the advanced technology, none of the sheer military might, but somehow outwitting them at every turn. It made no sense. How could a small, seemingly insignificant planet, with so few resources, produce warriors like this? Riker was not just a leader, he was a force of nature. And now, he was leading humanity to a place that no one had ever imagined they could go: victory. Riker's brilliance as a strategist turned the tide of the war, and what was once a defensive effort became a relentless offensive. Humanity was no longer just trying to protect its home. It was hunting the Graxar down, bringing the fight to them on their own turf. What started as small victories in isolated regions of Earth soon turned into coordinated strikes across the galaxy. The Graxar Empire, once feared for its might, now found itself on the defensive, as humans with nothing but their courage and their will to fight pushed them back. Riker had turned humanity into a force to be reckoned with, and with every victory, the human resistance grew stronger, more determined. What had started with small skirmishes turned into large-scale battles, with Riker always at the forefront. He did not just fight for the future of Earth, he fought for the future of all humankind. But despite his success, Riker was not a man without doubts. He did not relish the bloodshed, nor did he ever seek glory. His only concern was the safety of his people. He knew the cost of war, and he understood that every victory brought more risk, more danger to the very world he was trying to protect. The battles were taking their toll on him, and though his leadership remained unshaken, he began to realize that the path he had chosen might lead to his own death. Still, Riker was willing to make that sacrifice if it meant securing the survival of humanity. His soldiers, his fellow citizens, and the very world he had fought so hard to protect looked to him for guidance, and he could not afford to fail them. Zahar, observing from the Graxar flagship, could not deny the truth any longer. Riker was more than just a brilliant tactician. He was a leader unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Zahar had been raised to believe that the Graxar were the ultimate force in the universe, that no species could ever rival them. But in Riker, he saw something different. A species that, despite being weak in terms of technology and military might, had something far more dangerous: heart. And it was that heart, that relentless drive, that was turning the tide of the war. Zahar had always thought the Graxar were the ones to fear, but now he realized the truth. It was the humans, with their unwavering resolve, that were the true force to be reckoned with. As the war continued, it became clear to Zahar that humanity's rise was unstoppable. Riker was no longer just fighting for his people. He was fighting for the very soul of the galaxy itself, and, no matter the cost, humanity was determined to see it through to the end. The Graxar Empire had once thought Earth to be nothing more than a speck in the vast galaxy, a planet ripe for conquest with no real resistance to offer. But now, with every battle, every strike, it became painfully clear that they had made a grave mistake. Riker's brilliance in combat, his unwavering determination, and his ability to turn the very landscape of Earth into a battlefield were no longer a fluke. They were part of a new reality. A reality where humanity, against all odds, was not only surviving, but thriving. The Graxar fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, now trembled under Riker's relentless assault. Their flagship, a formidable vessel that had struck fear into countless civilizations, had been taken down in a daring strike that no one had seen coming. Riker had used human-made technology, adapted, enhanced, and, most of all, driven by sheer willpower, to break through the Graxar defenses. Zahar, still clinging to the belief that humanity's rise was simply an anomaly, watched in disbelief as the Graxar fleet faltered. It was impossible for him to understand how a species so young, so seemingly fragile, could manage to outthink and outfight a force as ancient and powerful as the Graxar. Every victory that Riker and his forces claimed only further undermined Zahar's faith in his own people's supremacy. What had started as a simple military campaign to subjugate Earth had become a nightmare for the Graxar, one that threatened to unravel the entire empire. Yet, even as the Graxar forces suffered defeat after defeat, Zahar refused to admit that they were losing. In his mind, the Graxar would prevail. After all, they had to. They had no choice. The true tipping point came when Riker led a daring mission deep into the heart of Graxar-controlled space. This wasn't just a military raid, it was a statement. The objective was clear: rescue human prisoners, capture key Graxar officers, and send a message that no part of the galaxy, not even the most secure corners of the Graxar Empire, were beyond humanity's reach. It was a risk unlike any Riker had taken before, but he knew that in this moment, humanity's future was on the line. The mission was a resounding success, one that sent shockwaves throughout the Graxar ranks. Riker's forces infiltrated the heart of their enemy's territory. Striking swiftly and decisively, they liberated prisoners, wiped out enemy outposts, and captured several high-ranking Graxar officers, leaving the invaders reeling. But it wasn't just the prisoners or the officers that Riker wanted. It was the statement. Riker knew that, to break the back of the Graxar Empire, he needed to do more than fight. He needed to force them to acknowledge humanity's strength. And so, he broadcasted a bold message across the galaxy, directly to the Graxar Empire. The words he spoke weren't just a plea for peace or a demand for mercy. They were a declaration of war. Humanity, Riker declared, would no longer be subjugated. The message rang out with the raw power of defiance, echoing across every communication channel in the galaxy. Riker's voice, calm yet unwavering, told the Graxar that Earth was no longer a target. It was a sovereign power. And anyone who dared to challenge humanity's right to exist in the stars would face the full wrath of Earth's fury. In that moment, the galaxy shifted. The Graxar Empire, once invincible, found itself standing at the precipice of defeat. No longer could they brush aside humanity as a simple nuisance. No longer could they view Earth as a vulnerable, helpless world. Riker had made it clear that humanity would not only fight to survive, they would fight to thrive, to protect their home and to carve out a place for themselves among the stars. Zahar, now realizing the full extent of Riker's ambition, found himself questioning everything he had known. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was a revolution, one that was quickly gaining momentum, and it was unstoppable. The Graxar Empire, for the first time, found itself truly vulnerable. Riker had pushed the galaxy into a new era, and the Graxar, for all their might, now had no choice but to face the reality that humanity was no longer to be feared, but respected. As the war against the Graxar Empire raged on, and humanity's victory seemed closer than ever, Captain Elias Riker found himself wrestling with a moral dilemma that gnawed at his conscience. The tides of war had turned in humanity's favor. His brilliant tactics had led them from one victory to another, and the Graxar were on the brink of collapse. But even as the momentum of success carried him forward, Riker began to wonder, what would be left of Earth once the war was over? The devastation was undeniable. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble, landscapes had been scarred, and millions had already lost their lives in the fight for survival. Humanity had become a war machine, capable of achieving victory. But at what cost? Could Earth rebuild from the ashes of this conflict? Was the price of their survival too high? In a rare moment of quiet, Riker sought solace in the company of his closest allies. They had fought alongside him through every battle, shared in the countless sacrifices, and endured the same uncertainty about the future. Yet even they, hardened veterans, could sense the weight of Riker's burden. In a dimly lit room aboard a mobile command ship, Riker opened up. His voice, typically strong and resolute, now carried an undertone of doubt. "We've fought so hard," he said. "But when the war ends, what will we have won? Will Earth still be our home? Or will it just be a graveyard for the lost?" His mind raced with the implications of their actions. Humanity had proved itself a force to be reckoned with. But in doing so, had they created a legacy of destruction that would haunt them for generations? His friends and commanders listened in silence, each of them understanding the magnitude of Riker's concerns. They had seen what war could do, what it could turn people into. Would humanity, so accustomed to surviving by any means necessary, be able to shoulder the responsibility of maintaining peace? Could they govern the galaxy, not just with strength, but with wisdom and compassion? Riker's doubts went beyond the battlefield. He was beginning to question whether humanity had the temperament to lead, to build, to foster trust and cooperation among the stars. They had become brilliant warriors, but had they become so consumed by war that they had lost sight of everything else? It was in these moments of reflection that Riker realized the weight of the task before them. Leading a people to victory was one thing, but leading them after the war, guiding them toward a future that didn't repeat the mistakes of the past, was something entirely different. Could humanity rise to the challenge, or would they, too, fall victim to the endless cycle of conquest and destruction that had claimed so many civilizations before them? The thought troubled Riker deeply. And as he stared out at the vast expanse of space beyond the ship's window, he wondered if the galaxy would one day view humanity not as liberators, but as conquerors, dangerous, unpredictable, and forever bound to the violence they had embraced. Zahar, watching from afar, was becoming more and more attuned to Riker's inner turmoil. The Graxar had long prided themselves on their strength and their unquestioned resolve in battle, but even Zahar had begun to recognize something in the human captain that he hadn't expected. Riker's internal struggle, his uncertainty about what would happen after the war, his hesitance to simply be a warlord, spoke to a depth of character that Zahar had never anticipated in a human. In the Graxar Empire, such a conflict would have been seen as a weakness, a lack of focus. But Zahar found himself thinking differently. He saw in Riker a leader who understood the consequences of war, who understood that victory was only the beginning. The human spirit, for all its raw power, was capable of questioning its own nature and striving for something greater. Zahar began to see Riker not just as a brilliant tactician, but as a leader who, like the best of his own people, understood the cost of power. This realization unsettled Zahar. He had come to Earth with the firm belief that the Graxar were the supreme beings, and that humanity was nothing more than a brief disturbance in the galactic order. But now, as he watched Riker grapple with his doubts, Zahar couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the human captain. In some strange way, he saw a reflection of his own people, a recognition of the weight of leadership, the consequences of war, and the potential for something more. Riker wasn't just fighting for Earth's survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's future, for the chance to ensure that they didn't become another empire swallowed by their own ambition. It was a dilemma Zahar had once faced, and, in that moment, he saw that perhaps humanity had more in common with the Graxar than he had ever thought possible. As Captain Elias Riker's reputation spread across the galaxy, it ignited a wave of reactions from the far-flung corners of the cosmos. Some civilizations saw humanity's rise as a threat, an unstoppable force that could soon challenge their own positions of power. Others, however, looked on with interest, eager to form alliances with Earth and its formidable warrior species. Earth's survival and subsequent victories against the Graxar Empire had become the stuff of legends, but it also posed a pressing question to the larger galactic community. What was to be done with these humans? A meeting was called. A galactic assembly convened with representatives from various alien races, all eager to discuss the human problem. The debate that unfolded was fierce. Some argued that humanity, with its sheer unpredictability and power, posed too great a risk to be allowed to continue growing unchecked. They called for a swift and decisive action, perhaps even extermination, before humanity could pose a larger threat to the galaxy. But there were others who saw the humans differently. These voices, though quieter, spoke of humanity's resilience, its courage, and its undeniable potential. They argued that Earth had earned its place in the galactic community, and that humanity's story was one of hope, not terror. It was during this critical moment that Zahar, the revered war hero of the Graxar, stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and when he spoke, the room fell silent. Though the Graxar had once been humanity's greatest adversary, Zahar now found himself standing as a reluctant witness to a pivotal moment in galactic history. He had been among those who believed the Graxar would easily crush Earth's defenses, dismissing humanity as weak and primitive. But now, having seen the relentless tenacity of Captain Riker and his soldiers, he had come to see humanity in a very different light. Zahar had seen warriors rise from every corner of the galaxy, but none had ever fought with the sheer ferocity and unity that humanity had shown. He didn't sugarcoat the truth. Zahar stood before the assembly and spoke of Riker's audacity, of a man who had defied the odds time and time again. He spoke of the countless battles humanity had fought, not just for survival, but for something greater. The soldiers of Earth didn't just fight for victory, they fought for each other, a bond that was unbreakable even in the face of impossible odds. He spoke of the human spirit, the refusal to surrender, to be subjugated, to back down in the face of a superior enemy. This wasn't the story of a species clinging to life. It was the story of a species that had dared to fight for its future, to carve out a place for itself in a galaxy full of much older and more powerful civilizations. Zahar's words struck a chord. He recounted the story of Riker's audacity, how, in the face of overwhelming Graxar forces, he had led humanity to unexpected victory. How Riker had not only outsmarted their fleets, but had done so with a blend of unyielding determination and adaptability that was simply unmatched. He spoke of the human soldiers who fought not just for their own lives, but for the survival of their families, their communities, their world. Each battle had been a testament to their unity and their refusal to be crushed under the weight of alien empires. In the most critical moments of war, Riker had led them with a strength of heart and mind, making choices that were often the difference between life and death. Zahar didn't just describe humanity as warriors, but as a species capable of growth, of learning from their mistakes, and of rising from the ashes of their own destruction. The tale he told wasn't just one of military prowess. It was a story of a people who had fought not to conquer, but to survive, and to protect their future. Riker, the symbol of humanity's fight, had shown that the heart of a species was far more important than the might of its weapons. The entire assembly sat in stunned silence as Zehar's words washed over them. For the first time, they saw humanity not as a primitive race on the verge of extinction, but as a force that could not and should not be ignored. The decision that followed was not unanimous, but it was undeniable. The story of humanity, as told by Zehar, had shifted the tides of the debate. While some still feared what humans might become, others saw in them a new hope for the future. For the first time in galactic history, a species once considered weak and insignificant had earned a seat at the table of the stars. As the assembly ended, the future of Earth and its place in the galaxy remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. Humanity's destiny was no longer one of survival. It was a future where they would fight, not just for their own survival, but for their right to stand among the greatest civilizations of the universe. And that future, in some strange way, had already begun. In the aftermath of the Galactic Assembly, humanity found itself standing at the precipice of something both exhilarating and terrifying, the crossroads of galactic power. The once disputed notion of Earth as a minor, insignificant planet had been thoroughly shattered. The story of Captain Riker and humanity's unyielding spirit, as told by Zehar, had swept through the assembly like a tidal wave, stirring something deep within the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. For the first time, humans were not viewed through the lens of vulnerability or weakness, but through a prism of awe and respect. Even the most skeptical alien leaders, who had once considered humanity nothing more than an annoyance, now saw them as a formidable force to be reckoned with. Earth had proven that it could not only survive against overwhelming odds, but it could rise, adapt, and become a dominant player in the galactic arena. As the dust settled and the assembly disbanded, humanity found itself standing on the precipice of a new era. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were no longer alone in their struggle for survival. They were no longer outsiders to the stars, but an emerging power in their own right. The galaxy was watching, and humanity's next steps would define its place in the cosmos for generations to come. But perhaps the most significant change was the transformation of Captain Elias Riker, the man who had become the symbol of humanity's strength and resilience. No longer just a military leader, Riker had evolved into a living legend. His name was spoken with reverence, not just by humans, but by beings from every corner of the galaxy. He had fought not only for Earth's survival, but for humanity's place in the larger galactic narrative. Riker, though burdened by the weight of leadership, now stood poised at the helm of humanity's future. His ability to unite people, both human and alien, was unprecedented. Where once humanity had been fragmented and isolated, they were now a beacon of hope, a symbol of what was possible when species worked together toward a common goal. The intergalactic community opened its doors to Earth, Riker's words echoed in the hearts of all who heard them. We are not just fighting for survival, we are fighting for our place in the stars. These words were not just a rallying cry, they were a declaration of humanity's newfound purpose. No longer content with being pawns in the cosmic game, humans now sought to take an active role in shaping their destiny. The path ahead was filled with both promise and peril. Humanity, now a respected member of the galactic community, had to navigate the complex dynamics of interstellar politics, form alliances, and face challenges that were beyond anything they had ever imagined. Yet, Riker and his fellow leaders understood that the real battle was not against any one enemy, but against the forces of division, ignorance, and fear that could fracture the very unity they had fought so hard to achieve. They were not just defending their planet anymore. They were defending the very ideals that had made them strong in the first place: resilience, courage, and the belief that no matter the odds, they could overcome anything. As Earth prepared to take its place among the stars, Captain Riker knew that the journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time in human history, Earth stood with its head held high, no longer a target, but a partner in the greater galactic community. With every step, they were carving out a future not just for themselves, but for every species that sought peace, unity, and progress. And while the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was undeniable. Humanity had earned its place in the stars. The future, for the first time, belonged to them, and the universe would never be the same again.